Okay, we started off, today's daf is Masechtas Zevachim Daf Nun Aleph, and we're going to finish up this sugya. Basically, this sugya is about filling up this grid, where if you have something learned in Kachim, only by Kachim, if you have something, let's say Kachim A, okay, we label this Kachim A, learned an idea via a Hekesh, right? Learned an idea. So the example that we're going to give is like a chatas. How do you know a chatas has to be slaughtered in the north? Because of a hekesh. It's a hekesh to an oila. So now, can chatas, which learned this idea from a hekesh, teach it to another area in Kachim, that same idea via a hekesh? So again, and then we said if it's learned, if chatas, if carbon A, kachim A, learn something via hekesh, can it teach it through a gzeir shava? Can it teach it through a kal v'chomer? Can it be a teacher through a binyanav? Then what happens if it was taught via gzeir shava? Basically, net we got. I think we got up to the binyanav. The last piece was a kal v'chomer, something that was learned from a Kal V'chomer, can it teach via a binyanav? So let's go into the Gemara here. We're starting on Daf Nun Amid Beis, and we're starting from Daf Nun Amid Beis, and very simply like this, about like 10 lines from the bottom. Dava halamid b'kal v'chomer. If, let's say, one kachim learned an idea via a kal v'chomer, okay? Mahu shiyalamid bivinyan ad. Can it just simply teach it to somebody else, to another area of kachim, via a binyan av? Binyan av is just like whatever you find by one will apply it by another. No logic involved. That's called a binyan av. Kal v'chomer has a certain amount of logic involved, but binyan av not. So if something was taught via binyan av, by Kal v'chomer, can it be teach it to somewhere else via a binyan av? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Tashma, I'll prove it to you that it could be done. The Brisa says like this: Molak. Remember, Malika was how you killed the bird when you brought it as a carbon. The kohen stuck his nail into the back of the bird's head and just clawed it off. So so if the carbon now normally when you slaughter an animal or you slaughter a bird, it's not a treifa, and it's not an avela anymore. It doesn't give off tuma, right? That's if you buy you go to A&P and you have a chicken there, so that chicken is an avela because it wasn't geshachted. But if you go to a kosher butcher shop, it's geshacht and it doesn't be mitama your hands. So now, what happens in the base of Migdash? They didn't use shchita; they used malika. So Moloch, let's say the Kohen did a Malika on a bird. Okay, so it should be technically be kosher and not an Avela. But Vinimtza's treifa, but they looked inside and the bird was a treifa. Something was wrong with the insides of the bird. Ooh, so therefore, what would be the din if somebody would is it an Avela? What's the din with this bird? So Rameir says it's not an Avela bird. Eino metama bebeis habliya. It will not be metama a person, and like a regular nevela of a bird, with you have to swallow it. In other words, when you go into A&P and take a chicken there, it's not metama you until you swallow it. Unlike the nevela of an animal, okay, you touch a piece of beef, even carrying a piece of beef is metama a person. By a nevela of a bird, you have to actually swallow it. But here, you did a malika on it. So if you did a malika on it, it's not mitama when you swallow it. So it's like removes any tuma from this bird. That's the opinion of Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says mitama bebeis habliya. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and he says no, malika, since this is a type of shchita, so to speak, that only works in the base of Migdash. If you found out that the bird's a treifa, will not will make the bird an avela, a nivlas oiftara. It will still be an avela. It will not be a bird that doesn't have tumah to it. Rab Meir says, kal v'chomer. I have a kal v'chomer. Listen to this. Uman nivlas behema, a nevela of a behema, an animal that just died. Shemetamba b'maga b'masa. If you touch it or carry the meat, so you become tameh. What happens? Shchitasai, if you shecht it, mitares treifasim mitumasa. Even if it turns out that that animal was a treifa, if you just do a slaughter to the animal right before it dies, let's say it's such a sickly animal with all sorts of problems, and you shecht it, it's not an avail anymore. So that idea would also apply. So we're going to say a kal v'chomer. If nevela of a behemoth which is so strong gets tahar via shchita, nivlas oif, a regular bird, right? She'ein metama b'magas masa. A regular bird that dies doesn't be metama. It's not tama until you swallow it. So it's a weaker type of tuma. Ein edin shetei shchitasim metareres to betray fasim into masa. So certainly, if you slaughter that bird, if you just do a regular shchita, even if the bird was a treifa, it would be a non-tame bird. So if you find a chicken and it's about to die and the sheikhet shechts it via kal v'chomer, I know that that it's tar, the bird's tar. So now you know that idea via kal v'chomer that a nivlas oif an oif, a bird, as soon as you do shchita to it, even if it turns out to be a treifa, it's tahar. So now we're going to learn a mamatzino. Mamatzino, what do we find? B'shchita, if you slaughter a bird, shemachsharta b'achila, that makes it kosher to eat. You go to Amid Aleph, Nun Aleph, mitahareres treifasa mitumasa. It's mitar, it's treifa from being tame. Because, right, like we just said, if you slaughter a bird, even if it turns out something was wrong with the inside of the bird, it's not a nevela bird, right? So af malika. So also, if you're going to do malika to a bird in the base of English, you just do it with the kohen does it with his fingernail. Shemachsheres bachila. Normally, it would make it kosher to eat. The kahanim would eat the bird's meat, but even if it's not taher to roifa samitumasa, even if it turns out to be a treifa, it's gonna be tahar. And that's the opinion of Rameir. So what you see for Rameir is very straightforward. That once we know something via kal v'chomer, right, that nevela of an oif tahar can be oif tahar could be kosher via shchita, even if it's a tray, even if it turns out to be a treifa, it will teach, and that learned it from a kal v'chomer from behema. That will teach malika, a malika bird, that as soon as you do malika, it's tahar from it's not tame. It's not going to be a nevela. Rabbi Yossi says no, and he differs than Rabbi Huda, but he basically says daya kinivlas behema tahira. A bird is like an animal. If just like an animal, only if you slaughter it, it's not tame anymore. So a bird, only if you slaughter it, and it's not tame anymore, but not malika. Malika will not work unless the animal is 100% kosher, not a treifa. A malika on a bird that's treifa will not work. So we see from there that according to Reb Meir, something that's learned from a kal v'chomer, something that's learned from a kal v'chomer is can reteach something with a binyan av. Says the Gemara v'lohi, that's not true. Hasam to have a he. Really, it's actually v'lohi. First, the Gemara says it's not true because a malika bird is learning from a nevela bird, from a shchita bird via a hekesh. It's not this. What the Gemara is saying is that although a shchita bird learned its idea via kal v'chomer, it's teaching an avela a malika bird via hekesh, not via binyan av. The Gemara doesn't bring it what that hekesh is, but the Gemara just says simple. Even hasam teheviti, even if you want to say it's a kal v'chomer binyan av story, mishchita dechulin ka'asya. Think about it. This has nothing to do with kachim, because we're talking about a shchita of an animal that via kal v'chomer teaches a shchita of a bird, a chulin bird. So shchita of a chulin animal teaching a shchita of a chulin bird to teach kachim via binyanav that malika will be tar from treifa. That is not a problem, because the only time we say that we have an issue if something is taught via a kal v'chomer teaching it to a binyanav, are left both sides of the equation are kachim. But if one side is chulin and the other side is kachim, then I never had a problem with this. So the Gemara basically remained this unresolved. Okay, so the Gemara remained this unresolved. A kal v'chomer teaching via binyanav. Now we go to the last line over here. Okay, so that's how the Gemara left it over here, unresolved. Here, and my question, as you can see on the screen, now we're going to the last line. Something that's learned from a binyanav, can it reteach via hekesh, gzeir shava, kal v'chomer? Those are all going to remain unresolved. Maybe the Gemara is going to say a binyanav could teach another one via binyanav, and that will end the sugya. Dava halome binyanav. Let's say the first Kachim A learned its idea via binyanav. Can it teach to somewhere else via hekesh, gzeir shava, kal v'chomer, or binyanav? So the Gemara says, Pshoit maha chada. I'll just try to pashit one. And the Gemara is being pashit this one. Binyanav, something learned from a binyanav, as you can see on the screen, can reteach another area of kachim via a binyanav. And where do you see that? So the Gemara says like this. Look from this brisa. The brisa begins and says, Mipnei ma amru, why did the Chachamim say, lon bidam kosher? Let's say you shechted an animal and you have the blood, you didn't do the sprinkling before nightfall, before shkia, before sunset. What happens if you did the sprinkling after sunset? Is the carbon kosher? Yes, it's kosher. Although the time expired, if b'diavad you sprinkled after at night, the carbon is kosher. How do I know that? Shahari lon be'emerim kosher. That if you forgot to bring the emerim, the fats on the mizbeach, which are supposed to really be put on during the daytime and nighttime, if by next morning you forgot to put the fats of a carbon on the mizbeach that you shechted yesterday, if b'di'evid you put it on the mizbeach, it's kosher. You don't have to take it off the mizbeach. So just like we see lam be'emerim is kosher, lam b'dam is also kosher. The blood, if you sprinkle it after the time expired, it'll make the carbon kosher. So that is a binyanav. Now, how did lon be'emerim kosher? How did lon be'emerim know its idea that it's kosher? Lon be'emerim kosher. How do you know if it overnighted if you overnighted the fats of the carbon and just brought it onto the mizbeach the next morning? How do you know that's kosher? And you don't have to take it off the mizbeach because shaharei lon bebasa kosher. Because the next morning you can eat the carbon. You shechted the carbon, let's say carbon shlomin, and you can eat it that day, that night, even the next day. So lon bebasar is kosher, so then lon be'emerim is kosher. So that's a binyanav, and once lon be'emerim is kosher, can we teach lon bedam kosher? So we see that something that's learned via a binyanav, lon be'emerim, which is the middle one, learned its idea from lon bebasar, therefore it could teach lon bedam. Now, the problem with this, as you can see, is that, wait a second, lon bebasar is kosher. Lon bebasar is kosher is only because it's not really you doing something wrong, because shlomim technically is allowed. The time didn't expire by a shlomim in the morning, the next day. It's still within the realm of time because the shlomim is nechol, the shnei yomim, and the night in between, the 2 days and the night in between, the day that you shechted, the night after, and the next day. So that is not an expiration. So how could that teach lon be'emerim kosher? Lon be'emerim means you put it on the mizbeach after the time expired. So the Gemara is going to ask that question. Now the Bryce is just going to discuss other things. Yotzi, if you take the limbs of the animal outside the base of Mikdash, so then, what happens if you bring it back into the base of Mikdash and put it on the mizbeach? You leave it there. Since technically during specific periods of time we didn't have a base of Mikdash and everybody had a private mizbeach, and you brought the limbs of an animal on your private mizbeach outside the base of Mikdash. So even when we do have a private mizbeach, Even when we do have a Beis Hamikdash, if you bring the limbs outside the Mizbeach, outside the Beis Hamikdash, and then bring it back, b'diavad, if you put it on the Mizbeach, we don't take it off. Tameh, tameh, an animal that's tameh, right? So you don't put it on the Mizbeach. But b'diavad, if you did put it on the Mizbeach, don't take it off. Because sometimes they put tameh animals on the Mizbeach when everybody was tameh. So during the Avodas Tzibah, when everybody was tamei, they put a tamei animal on the mizbeach. So therefore, if a tamei animal goes on the mizbeach, it's we don't take it off. Chutz lizmanei. If a person slaughtered an animal thinking that he's going to eat the animal, in a week's time, so he made it pigel. So what happens if you took the animal, you did everything normally, you sprinkled the blood, and you put the pigel animal on the mizbeach? On the Mizbeach, leave it there. Leave it there. Hoyel, since umaratza lepigulai, since you effectively had a kosher animal and you made it kosher to make it enough to make it pigel, so it must have been kosher enough to be made pigel, it's kosher enough to be left on the Mizbeach. Chutz l'mekaymai. How do you know chutz l'mekaymai if you thought that you're going to eat the meat in a outside the Beis Hamikdash, outside Yerushalayim? You're going to eat the meat in New Jersey, so you passel the carbon. What happens if you put the meat of that carbon on the mizbeach? You don't take it off. Since the pasuk compares that to chutz lizmane, the pasuk says, as you can see on the screen, so here it's chutz lizmane. And the makra voice lo yechashev lo pigel you. It's also heyochel yechel is also if you think chutz l'mkaymai. This pasuk includes both chutz l'zmanai and chutz l'mkaymai. And just like chutz l'zmanai, if it gets onto the mizbeach, you leave it there. So chutz l'mkaymai as well. What about shekib l'psulim mizarko? Let's say a kohen that was makabel the dam, and he sprinkled the dam. Let's say a tamei kohen. He was makabel the dam and sprinkled the blood on the mizbeach. So what happens if that meat ended up on the mizbeach? If it's a kohen tamei, that would technically be kosher when everybody's tamei. So then that carbon you could leave it on the mizbeach. But if let's say a balmum, which we never find a kohen that's a balmum is kosher. So if he caught the blood and sprinkled it on the mizbeach, and you put the animal on the mizbeach, you take it off. So that's the point. The point is, so that we see from this brisa, there's a concept, as I said before. Once the brisa is finished, we see the concept that Amorim learned its idea from Lon Bebasar, and there via Binyan Av, and it teaches Lon Bedam. So we see something that's learned by Binyan Av can reteach something that's learned to reteach it with a Binyan Av. So the Gemara says, how could have Lon Be'erim learned that it's kosher from lon from a shlamim? A shlamim, the time didn't expire. That's why you could eat it on the next day. But the Amorim, the next day, its time expired. You can't put it on the mizbeach. So it didn't really teach. Lon Be'erim didn't learn its idea from Lon Bebasar. So answers the Gemara, Tana, you're right. It's not teaching Lon Be'emerim learned from another pasuk that says Zois Taras Ha'oila. The halacha is that certain things that once you put it on the mizbeach, even though it's pasul, let it stay there. So it's not really from a binyan av. So even though I have here in the illustration, let's see if I have in the illustration that we solved something that's learned with a binyan av to teach another binyan av, it's not really solved. Because the Gemara concludes that the Brisa don't take it literally. The Brisa is just telling you a remez. But the real limud is Zois Tairas Ha'oila, that teaches you that Lom Be'emer, and once you put it on the Mizbeach, a lot of things that you put on the Mizbeach, which are initially not kosher, you leave it on the Mizbeach. Okay, new sugya. Shirei Adam. The Mishnah said that the leftover blood, why you put it you sprinkle it, you take it outside the Beis Hamikdash, right? You take it outside the sanctuary, right? As you can see here is the sanctuary. You sprinkle the blood on this on the middle on the inside mizbeach, and then you go as soon as you leave the sanctuary, which is this building over here. You come across the mizbeach and you pour the extra blood, the leftover blood, on the drain that's on the side of the mizbeach. So now the Gemara says like this. How do you know you do that? Amakrab, her success. You leave the sanctuary and you go out and you find the outside mizbeach, and the side that you find that you come across first, which is this, the side that when you leave the mizbeach, you see he leaves the sanctuary and he meets the mizbeach, and you pour the leftover blood down the drain over there. Tanarabanim. El Yisoid Mizbach Ha'oila, there's five times the pasuk says you sprinkle the blood, the leftover blood, on the Mizbeach Ha'oila. One, by Par Herem Dova Par Kohen Mashiach, by Par Herem Dova Shatzibar, by Seir, and those sprinklings of those paros are sprinkled inside the sanctuary. Then the Seir of a Nasi, who did an Aveira, his sprinkling is on the outside Mizbeach, and the leftover, Torah says, put it on the Mizbach Ha'oila. And then by a regular chatas of a kesva or a seira, where a regular Jew brings the chatas, the Torah says pour it on the side of the mizbeach. So the Torah says you soid Mizbach Ha'oila, v'lo yisoid Mizbeach Hapinit. Remember, don't put it on the side of the inside mizbeach. Bring it out of the sanctuary and pour it down the drain by the Mizbach Ha'oila, by the outside mizbeach. El yisoid Mizbach Ha'oila. There is no such a thing that, remember, the inside Mizbeach, as you can see in this picture, has no yisoid, no foundation with a drain over there. There is no foundation there. And then we learn from the third El Yisoid Mizbach Ha'oila by Seir Nasi, Tein Yisoid Mizbeach Shel Oila. The Torah says, the pasuk is teaching you, not only does the seir of a nasi gets thrown by the foundation, but every oila, where the Torah doesn't tell you what to do with the leftover blood. Let's say you bring a carbon oila. What do you do with the leftover blood? You pour it down that drain that's on the side of the mizbeach. Maybe you can bring it anywhere. Maybe you can pour it on the inside mizbeach, and maybe the Torah is teaching you that the sprinkling of the initial sprinkling of the oila, as you can see in this picture, has to be where there's a foundation over here. You see, as the kohen is pouring on the foundation. That's what it's teaching you. The initial sprinkling of Shtaim Shenaba has to be over something that has a foundation. But it's not teaching you that the blood should be poured down the drain over there. So the Gemara says, no. Rabbi Shmuel. So maybe because you could say that the sprinkling could be done on any side of the mizbeach, even where there is no foundation. So the Gemara says that's not true. Rabbi Shmuel, kal v'chayma, ma'ashirayim, the leftover blood, she'ein mechaperim, that doesn't bring kapara to unin yisoid. You need the foundation there. Tchilas oila shebechaperes ein edin shetin yisoid. When you're doing the initial sprinkling, it has to be over a foundation. So this sprinkling is the real kapara of the kohen. It has to be done over the foundation of the mizbeach. And Amar Rabbi Akiva, same idea. Ma'ashirayim she'ein mechaperim, the leftover blood that doesn't bring a kapara. Vein burning the kapara, it's not coming for kapara to unin yisoid. You have to pour it where the foundation is. Tchilas oila, when you first do the sprinkling, shemechaperes uvola kapara ein edin shetun yisoid. Certainly, it needs a foundation. Imkei ma tamad loima el yisoid mizbach oila, tein yisoid mizbacha shel oila. That means that by every carbon oila, you're supposed to pour the leftover blood down this drain over here, down this drain over here. So that's basically the brisa. We're going to take apart this brisa, and we'll stop in about a minute. Amamar, we learned in the brisa, El Yisoid Mizbach, V'lo Yisoid Mizbeach Pnimi. Torah tells you by the Par Kohen Mashiach, pour it down by the outside Mizbeach, by the foundation, the leftover blood. Says the Gemara, but the Torah is telling you, don't pour it by the inside Mizbeach's foundation. Says the Gemara, maybe the Torah is telling you that where to pour the extra blood. Maybe the Torah is telling you can pour it by the inside Mizbeach, and you can pour it by the outside Mizbeach. Answers the Gemara, Asher mi Pesach oil moed nafka. That you learned where the Torah specifies that you should leave the sanctuary and go to that mizbeach that's outside in front of the oil moed, not not pour it by the mizbeach hapnimi. So the leftover blood has to be, you got to leave the mizbeach, you got to leave the sanctuary and pour it over there, pour it there. Then we learned al yisoid mizbach ha'olah by the nasi. We go to Amid Beis. Ten yisoid mizbeach sha'olah. That's teaching you that for every carbon oila, you're supposed to pour it on the drain. That's the mizbeach ha'olah. The isal kadaita k'diksiv. If you're going to say that it's just teaching you to that the seir nasi has to be poured there by down the drain. Halamali kra. Why do I need a pasuk? Why do I need a pasuk? Obviously, I would know what to do with the leftover blood. Since the sprinkling of the seir nasi was sprinkled on the outside mizbeach, so you pour it down the drain by the outside mizbeach. L'shirayim. Shabrayim habroya of delay. You did it. You sprinkled the normal blood on the outside mizbeach. So of course I'm going to put the leftover on the outside mizbeach. So why do I Pasuk has to teach you ten yisoid lemizbeach shaloila? Finally, so the Gemara answers, I would have thought that if you sprinkled the blood on the inside mizbeach, the leftover blood is poured on the outside mizbeach. And if you sprinkle the blood on the outside mizbeach, the leftover blood should be poured down the drain by the inside mizbeach. The baroi, we go to Amid Gamel, the baroi, the gavoy, the baroi, whatever is made on the outside, bring it inside. Whatever is bring on the inside, you bring it outside. But the answer is, we already established, there is no foundation by the inside mizbeach. You see, as you can see, there was no hole over there. We know that from the par kohen, from the par helam davish sibur, an extra pasuk that says don't put a drain over here. So it must be that the Torah is telling you pour it down the drain on the side of the mizbeach that's on the outside mizbeach. Well, why do I need a pasuk there? There's nowhere else to put it. Elamai, the pasuk is telling you that by every carbon, even a carbon oila, where the Torah didn't tell you what to do with the leftovers, the Torah is telling you, pour, after you finish doing the service, pour the leftover blood, as you can see in the picture, down the drain. After you finish doing that last sprinkling, pour the rest down the drain that's on the outside mizbeach, even though the Torah didn't tell you by a regular carbon oila. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Daf Nun Beis Amid Aleph.